Good day, everybody. The International Parking Institute is pleased to present this webinar program entitled Data-Driven Success, Building a New Data Standard for Parking. My name is Justin, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Please note that all participant lines will be muted during the session. If you need assistance at any time during the program, please raise your hand or use the chat box on the left-hand side of the screen. Today's presentation will last 60 minutes and will include a specific question and answer period. However, you can queue up a question for us at any time during today's presentation. To enter the question through the webinar system, simply type your question into the chat box located on the left side of your screen and click Send. These instructions will be repeated later in the program. You will receive access to the archive of the webinar in a few days. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Mike Drow. He is a Senior Vice President of Corporate Development at T2 Systems and the largest parking technology provider in North America. In his role, Mike establishes and maintains technology partnerships and acquisitions to align with the long-term strategic goals of T2 Systems. He has led the development of mobility services, remote management operations, mobility payments, and interactive marketing services, and has worked with municipalities, university, airports, and urban garages. He is the co-chair of IPI's Technology Committee and is a certified project management professional. Mike, welcome to the program. The audience is yours.
Thank you, Justin. Hello, and thank you for attending this webinar. During this webinar, we're going to provide you an update on parking data standard efforts in the industry. More specifically, we're going to give you an update on the new Alliance for Parking Data Standards. We'll provide an update on the first phase of the standard. And finally, we're going to go into how you can become more involved and engaged in furthering the development of these standards. As Justin said, we will have a question and answer period at the end, but please feel free to start entering your questions in the chat window, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. So why are the parking data standards necessary? Sharing data is becoming a necessity in a connected world. More and more of our parking and garage operations involve multiple systems that need to talk to each other. Or you have an operation that has multiple facilities that need to share data amongst the facilities. We are also seeing many other industries wanting to connect to the parking world, whether it's event ticketing, transit and transportation operations, and even restaurants and entertainment complexes are trying to connect their customers and make it easier for those customers to get to their venues through parking facilities. All of this is increasing the amount of data sharing that's going on. However, to connect that data and to connect those systems, currently it requires a significant amount of effort and in many cases cost to share basic data between those systems and those industries. In addition, we have many different entities using different terms for various parking concepts and formats in how they store and send that data, which just makes it more complicated and costly to connect those systems. Through the standards, we hope to make it easier to create, share, and integrate that data. So we're spending less time, effort, and cost on integrating data and reallocating that time and cost to more value-added services that help us deliver better solutions to our customers and our partners. What started out as IPI-DataEx a year ago has now grown into the Alliance for Parking Data Standards. The Alliance, also known as APDS, is a not-for-profit organization. APDS is a consensus-driven international standard that establishes a common language for data elements and definitions in the parking, transportation, and mobility sectors. So we're trying to provide that common language and share it with other entities that have a very strong interest in interacting with our parking partners. The Alliance is creating those data standards and will cover the full range of parking data elements, including location, occupancy, rates, transactions, and payments. And we'll spend more time talking about how we're going to build and develop those standards a little bit later in the webinar. As I said earlier, the Alliance, the initial data standard effort started out within IPI as IPI-DataEx, and we have since grown it to be a much more global organization through the Alliance. Currently, the Alliance was created by the British Parking Association, the European Parking Association, and the International Parking Institute. By coming together, we have been able to bring together many more resources, knowledge experts, and connections with other industries that are trying to use data to ensure that the data standard is going to be useful and relevant to the global parking industry and the industries that interact with parking. Our mission is to facilitate seamless integration, compatibility, and communication between parking entities. So how does one parking company talk to another parking company, or a parking garage to a parking garage, as well as a system? How do we communicate with the automotive industry? We all hear and talk about the autonomous vehicle and the connected vehicle. How do we make sure that the parking industry is supporting those initiatives underway to improve customer conveniences? We're building the standard to support IT developers, to help IT developers focus on the value-added portion of their efforts versus on the integration. How to integrate to various services, whether it's ride-sharing, card-sharing, entertainment services. How do we help provide them with information that allows them to connect to parking services more effectively and efficiently? And then finally, MAP and other app providers, ensuring that the information flow is enabled in a quick and correct format. And then we have, since we've started the Alliance, we've actually been approached by many other stakeholders from other industries who are very interested in learning more and engaging with us on the data standard to help connect their services to parking or to utilize the services that parking can provide. The Alliance is made up of many teams, and the key parts are steering groups and review groups. These groups are comprised of industry experts from across the globe, and inside and outside of the parking industry. As we go through the guiding principles in a moment, you're going to see our focus is on parking, but also making sure that the parking world is effectively connected to the other folks. We're also relying on consultants to help us with those interactions with other data standards. We are not trying to recreate the wheel or recreate or data standards that already exist in other data standards. We want to be the expert in the parking data world and help share and distribute that parking data standard information so that other standards can leverage it and more quickly interact with the parking industry. So that goes to the challenge. We already briefly touched on the reasons for a data standard earlier in the webinar, but let's look at a visual representation. And as this spaghetti chart kind of shows, down at the bottom are the various types of parking operations that exist in our world, whether it's car parks, parking garages, valet operations, or on-street parking. Those are where people are trying to park, and that many of us on this webinar manage and operate or own today. At the very top are the customers that we are trying to talk to, and those customers engage us through their car, through a connected car, through their PC at home when they're looking for where to park or what to do on an evening, or through their mobile phones. The challenge then becomes how to connect those parking facilities and the data that we have and the information that we want to share and the services that we can deliver to those customers at the top. And as this depiction shows, there are many ways for a parking facility to connect to the end consumer through various services. It may be through a data aggregator, as shown at the bottom middle. It may be through a garage owner or operator's own digital tools, where a garage owner has a website that allows people to buy monthly parking passes or daily parking or event sales. You may be using a marketing platform such as ParkWiz, Spot Hero, or ParkCloud, or Chauntry, a third-party service that helps to market the parking facility to the various public services out there. You may be using internet search services such as Google, Here, Maps, or other services such as Yahoo to connect to those customers. Or you may be using an automotive OEM platform such as BMWs, GMs, or Fords. So there are many ways that a garage or a parking facility is going to connect to a consumer, and no one consumer is going to use the same method for every time they're looking for parking. Sometimes they may go through an event service such as Ticketmaster to buy their parking. Other times they may just do their own private search and not prepay for anything and just look on a map where they're parking to see where their parking facilities are. The point of the data standard is to help that communication so that a garage owner doesn't need to make one-off integrations with each of the various parties or channels that they're working with, but that they can rely on a data standard that they can present their data to the world, and that they know that the entities that are using the data standard will know how to accept that data and then therefore talk to the consumer. A similar view to this is inside the parking garage or the parking management system itself. As you can see in the center box, there are many data elements that are involved in managing a parking facility. There's a static location information, such as where is my location, who are the contacts, who's the garage manager, who's the customer support, what are the areas inside my parking garage, are there reserved parking areas, nested parking areas, daily parking areas, no parking areas, what are the operating hours of the parking facility, what is the layout of that facility, is it above ground, below ground, reserved only, pay by license plate, pay by pay and display, pay by space, ticket in, ticket out. What are my rates? How are payments accepted? Is there dynamic information that's available, such as space utilization or availability? And also then finally, how do I handle billing and payments? So these are all things that on a daily basis a garage owner or operator needs to manage and deal with. The intent of the data standard is to help share how that information can be communicated with other parties. And as you see in this diagram, all of those red line arrows and the gray arrows are all areas where the data standard intends to help more effectively and easily allow the sharing of data between the different services. And again, as we talk about the Alliance for the Parking Data Standards, it's important to recognize the Alliance is only creating a data standard on how to share data between systems. We are not defining data standards on how an entity should use the data or transform that data within their own operations. This is just how to share data between two parties. We're also not setting standards on how to operate a facility. Again, those are specific items that each garage or owner that owns a parking facility needs to make on their own. We are just focused through this standard on how to share the data effectively and easily. So that goes into what are the guiding principles for this data standard and for the Alliance in general. Well, the first one is to define a set of open global data standards which constitute a common language for parking operations and sharing parking-related data with other industries. We want to make sure that when we say that the number 573, it has a specific meaning when we say it's a rate or it's a location ID, and that everyone understands and has a common understanding of what that data element means, both within the parking as well as with other industries, again, with the intent to make it easier to communicate with and between parking industries. We're going to reference existing standards when developing the APDS standard. This goes to the earlier point. We are not trying to generate new standards where those standards already exist. So we are leveraging data standards that are already in the transit world or in the geospatial world that define how to identify specific points in space on a map. We are referencing those and are including those in our standards. But we will be focusing on creating data standards that are focused, that are help to define and communicate parking-related information. No one is going to be forced to use the standard. One of the key points that we are focused on is making sure the standard delivers value to the industry. And we can track and monitor the value that we're delivering by the adoption rate of the marketplace of the standard. As the marketplace adopts the standard, we're going to know we're on the right track. And as we work on things that aren't of value or not creating a pain point for the industry, we'll be able to reduce those, or reduce our focus and effort on those, and reapply our focus on the things that do matter. We're focused on enabling the sharing of data within the industry, again, to reduce the cost and effort to support data sharing. Again, that is a key point, and that flows to the number 4 bullet point. As long as we're helping to reduce cost and effort to support data sharing, we expect that the marketplace will adopt our data standards, and we know that we are adding value to the industry and to the industry's partners. Creating and maintaining the APDS standard is going to be transparent, and the participation will be solicited and structured from the industry with structured feedback. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in the webinar, about how the people on this call can become engaged. Again, the key success of the standard is going to be how inclusive we are in collecting feedback, engaging others in the creation of the standard, understanding where the pain points are in sharing data, and then helping to resolve those pain points. To do that, we're going to convene parking industry and data standard experts, as well as related stakeholder representatives, to develop and maintain the standards. The standards are going to be living documents. We don't expect them to change every day, but we do expect them to evolve as the industry evolves and as we engage other industries in sharing data. And finally, the APDS, the Alliance, is not going to store parking data or act as an aggregator. Again, our focus is on how to share, how to facilitate the sharing of data between other parties in a way that does not create any competitive advantage for any one entity. So we are very focused on the data standard and in ensuring that other entities can use that standard and deliver the value that other entities can bring to various customers, clients, and other industries. What is the approach to developing the standards? Well, we're developing the standard in phases. There are many data elements to capture within the parking, and we decided that it would be better to start in a small but repeatable process, and that over time we will eventually get to all of the necessary data elements that support parking. The industry defines those objectives and priorities, and on the coming slides we're going to be able to show you what those phases currently are. And I can share with you that those have already started to adjust as the industry has engaged and told us where the pain points are. As we are developing the standards, we're relying on working groups to develop the drafts, and then we're relying on larger groups and basically the public to offer comments on those drafts so that we can review them and finalize the initial drafts of the standards. As you can see with the creation of the Alliance and the 3 associations that form the Alliance, the industry is leading the governance of where the Alliance goes with the standard and how the data standard is used across the globe. And again, we are developing and following those principles that I highlighted on the previous slide to guide our effort. This is a very large task with many, many people involved, and the guiding principles will help us to stay true to the intent and goals that we are trying to accomplish. So what are the specific parking data standards? This is going to get a little technical, but we are modeling using EML and tool support for schema generation. We are using a European existing transit data standard as our framework, which is called DataEx 2. The data models and standards are being tooled in an enterprise architecture, which is a software application that is commonly used in the management of UMLs and data standards, so that this will help us to communicate with other standards organizations, as well as with the technical folks throughout various industries who need to engage in using the standards. While our concepts are going to support the parking industry view of parking, we are reusing as many useful constructs from other existing standards as possible. Again, we aren't trying to create competing standards. We want to be the entity that provides useful and valid information around parking data and how that parking data should be shared and integrated into the many other data standards that exist. And as you can see here is just a list of some of the standards that we've already engaged with and are leveraging in our creation of our standards. And then that just furthers on to the linkage of other standards. Again, while we're focused on the parking side and we are looking at expertise in the parking to help us create parking standards, we also recognize the success of our standard depends on how well it helps other people in other industries interact with the parking industry. And that might be travel services, transit operations, EV charging, payment tools, security standards as well. All of those are being talked to and looked at so that we make sure that we aren't creating walls, but rather building bridges so that this standard allows parking owners and operators to more effectively engage with other services that are being developed, especially in a connected world. So with that, let's talk about the actual development of the standard today. As I said, we are building the standard in phases. Phase 1, which is we are in the middle of right now, is focused on 3 data domains: parking place, parking rates, and parking occupancy or availability. These standards are available for review now. Actually, I take that back. Parking place is available for review now. Rate and occupancy will be available within the next 2 weeks. The Alliance is then working on for Phase 2, which will be starting shortly, the following data domains: enforcement, credentials or parking rights, vehicle, transaction, and event. And again, the focus of these data standards is not to define what is the right way to enforce a parking operation or the right way to process a transaction, but how do you share information about enforcement details? An example might be, how would you share that a certain parking enforcement officer wrote a violation? How should that violation be shared data-wise with other entities that may need to have it? Similarly, for a transaction, we are not defining what are the right ways to do a transaction, whether it's online or in lane, but what we're more focused on is what data elements need to be involved in a transaction that will allow various entities to engage and share in that data. And then that leads to Phase 3. We know that there will be additional place information to add to our original Phase 1 offering, and that may be ancillary services, amenities, or other details about the parking place. And we fully expect that there will be more data domains to be identified. So how does this come together and these different data domains get turned into value-added services? Well, one of the areas that the Alliance is already focused on for Phase 2 is around curbside management. As many of us in the industry have already seen many times over the last couple of months, there is a growing interest in what is curbside management and how should an operation support curbside management. And curbside management can occur obviously on an on-street operation, but it also occurs inside a garage where you are dealing with taxi drop-offs or ride-share and car-share services and who can be where and when at what times. If you're looking at the red dotted box, those items circled by the red box, identify those data standards that we believe are going to be supported or that support curbside management. So as we go through phase 2, our intent is to engage experts in curbside management to make sure that the data standard is supporting the needs of the developments and initiatives in curbside management, so that systems will be able to talk to each other and help to better manage activities around the curb. So what constitutes a standard? Well, a key part is in the engagement with the experts within the industry. The ability to have a discussion, talk about the pros and cons of various ways to structure the data, to communicate the data, and to document the data. Also, allowing the market to prioritize what standards we need to have. However, that's the real part of the standard. After all those discussions occur, though, we need to document that output. And it is through these 4 documents that we will be delivering the output of those discussions and the consensus that comes out of the discussion on how best to share data that the rest of the industry can use. And those 4 documents are going to be a use case document. So we will give examples of how to apply the standard to common activities related to sharing data. That may include how to share data on a permit holder between an online service and a revenue control system in a parking facility, or to a mobile license plate enforcement team driving around on the streets. It may involve a use case around someone buying parking on an airline's website and then communicating that to the airport's parking system. So there'll be many use cases defined, and we'll show how the standard is used in those specific use cases. There'll be an information model. This is a detailed explanation of the data elements in a specific standard. So as I showed you previously, phase 1 is focused on parking place, rates, and occupancy. We'll have an information model that goes into the detail for each of those 3 for phase 1. A key part of the data standard is setting standard definitions for terms used so that we all understand what it is that we're talking about conceptually. So we'll have a data dictionary that lists those data elements and the definitions for them. The data dictionary also defines common lists that may be used appropriately within the data standard. So the example may be when describing the layout of a parking facility, how do you describe an above ground versus a below ground versus a mixed structure, which has a combination of the both. And finally, there will be a UML model. And this is the data model that resides in that software application called the Enterprise Architect. This is a very detailed information that shows the relationships between the various data elements. To give you a better insight into what that might look like, the left-hand side is the starts of some of the UML models, and on the right-hand side is kind of a high-level view of what's in our phase 1 called Parking Place. So as you can see, in Parking Place, we have several large data categories. We have place data, layout data, operating hours data, payment acceptance data, contact data, and on and on. On the left, we will take those high levels and we actually start structuring the specific data elements into those relationships. And again, this is the start of our Parking Place standard. Key to those data standards, though, are the definitions or key concepts that help us to show the relationships of the parking. Within the Parking Place standard, we have created a concept of a parking place hierarchy, and we've given definitions to specific things. The center point of this hierarchy that's being proposed in the Parking Place standard is called the parking place. This is most easily recognized as a consumer recognized parking facility or on-street parking area that any one of us might know or see. So as you drive up to a surface lot, it would be the surface lot. When driving on street, it may be the zone or the street curb that you're looking to park on. Parking places can be collected into entities called campuses. This allows an entity to collect up various parking places together that say they have a relationship. So it may be a business campus, it may be a city that has many on-street parking zones, or it may be a university campus in a very familiar use of the word campus. Below parking place, we have hierarchy elements. These are the building blocks that allow us to define sub-areas of a parking place. This may be in a parking garage, level 1, level 2, level 3. It may be a nested area. And then finally, below hierarchy elements, we have a very key point called the identified area. And this is a very significant point in the hierarchy, because this is where we are able to start attributing a lot of detail to various types of areas within a parking place. This may be an entry zone, an exit zone, a loading zone for taxis or rideshare or car share, no parking zones, disabled parking zones, and many, many other areas. By having specifically identified area types, we're able to more clearly identify the appropriate attributes to attach to each area. And this becomes more useful as we think about connected cars and autonomous vehicles, being able to identify where an entry area is, or where an exit area is, or where a loading zone is for whether it's taxis, freight and delivery trucks, or even rideshare services. And finally, no parking zones as well, because that's just as important to identify as where parking areas are. So the next page goes into a more detail of what a place data element looks like. Again, showing a little bit more of the UML and the amount of detail that will go in. So here we have place. You can see attached to places are those area locations that we just described as our hierarchy. Point location, that is where we are able to identify the geolocation, latitude, longitudes of a specific place, so we can allow people to navigate to various areas. In the top right, you'll see our contacts. So who is the contact? What type of contact is it? Email addresses and such. And then we have a large list of common components. As when you go into the data standard, you'll be able to see the listing of them. The final one I wanted to show was the identified area data element. Again, this was the lowest element, and this allows us to attach a lot of different information to it. And you'll see around the right-hand side and the bottom side, we have several different types of area. And again, each type has different attributes attached to it. But by having these, when an entity receives one of these area types, they're going to have a better understanding of what that area of a parking facility or parking place is doing. So it may be electric vehicles, it may be general parking, it may be an unloading zone, an entry zone, an exit area, and again, exit would be like exit lanes, a no parking zone, disabled parking zone, valet parking zone, pickups, drop-offs, and even reversible lanes. So for each of these elements, when that element is selected, different and appropriate attributes are associated to it that then a parking owner or operator will be able to provide the appropriate detail. What does some of that detail look like? Well, for an entry zone, it may include what is the height limits for entry in that area? What sort of credentials are accepted within that area? What is the width? What is the operating hours of that identified area? Is that entry lane open after 9 p.m. at night, or is it open until midnight? And then on the left-hand side, you can see some of the same things as similar to the parking place. Attributes, hours of operation, as well as operating restrictions. So this goes to possibly no parking zones. Being able to say a curb is a no parking zone from 9 p.m. at night till 9 a.m. the next morning, but from 9 a.m. the next morning till 9 p.m. at night, it is a general parking area, or it's a loading zone. So the data standard is going to help us to better define uses in our parking places, whether they are on-street or in off-street operations. So where can you get more information on the data standard and get into the more of the details that exist. Again, I've only provided a short overview. Well, if you go to this website, www.allianceforparkingdatastandards.org/resources, you'll be able to download both an overview and a summary document of the efforts to date. There are two documents. One is about 4 pages. The other one is 14 pages in depth. So you can pick the version that has the amount of detail that you're interested in. And this goes into a lot more detail on how the phases are working, what the constructs are looking for the parking data standard, and the efforts right now. In addition, if you go to the same website and go under Contact, you'll be able to request the standards for review. The Phase 1 is being released for public comment in the next week to 2 weeks. We were asking everyone to submit a request so that we can track who has a copy of it, so that we can make sure that we receive your feedback. But we are asking that you give us your name so that we can contact you. And again, you can go to this website to obtain a request for the Phase 1 standard. What are the next steps in the standard? As I've talked about, the Phase 1 public comment period is opening within the next week to 2 weeks, and that comment period will be open through September 30th. During that time, we will be holding webinars to engage the public, to hear their comments and engage in discussion on those standards. We will also be accepting written comments and thoughts and suggestions on the standard through September 30th. At the end of September 30th, we will close the period for receiving public comments, and the working group will begin to review those comments and will revise the Phase 1 standard as appropriate. The working group will be a fairly large group. It'll probably be 20 to 30 people that will be reviewing the comments, and again, this is relying on the industry to help us guide what does the industry need in regards to a standard, and how does it interact with other people. So it's not just parking experts, but we have already engaged people outside of the industry to help us make sure the standard supports their needs as well. After that working group is done, we expect that parking place rates and occupancy version 1 of the standard will be released in the 4th quarter. So an official standard will be released at that time, and we will be outside of the comment period. We are currently in the process of selecting our data elements to include in Phase 2. And if going back to the previous slides, those were those yellow documents where we had or the yellow boxes where we had enforcement, vehicle, credential, transaction, and event. Those are the proposed ones right now. We are working with various folks to make sure that those are the appropriate things to address. Again, going back to the comment that the standard needs to help solve current industry pain points. We will be convening a working group in the middle of the 3rd quarter to begin developing the Phase 2 standard. So taking the data elements that have been defined and then beginning to add the detail to them and working through working together to collaborate and reach consensus on the best way to share those data elements amongst various systems. We expect that the working group will release their draft of their Phase 2 work in the 4th quarter for public comment. So it's about a 2 to 3 month period before we will have documents similar to what's being released for Phase 1 for the public to review and comment on. We've already kind of talked about what are we expecting to be in Phase 2 data elements. Well, there'll be enforcement data. And again, we're not talking about this is not a standard on how to do enforcement. This is just a standard on how to share enforcement data. Vehicle data will likely be part of it, and we expect that we'll be able to leverage existing vehicle data standards that already exist in the world. Credential and right. So this is how do you define the right or privilege to park for use in an identified area for an individual? What are the expiration periods? How do we identify the credential types and physical credential parameters? That'll be defined in the standard. And then finally, the transaction. Again, not focused on how to do a transaction or the right way to process a transaction, but more focused on what data elements need to be involved when sharing transaction data between systems. And most important, as you've heard me comment several times, the value of the alliance is really based on the people that participate. The goal of the alliance is to solve industry pain points and to make it more easier and effective to share data within the parking industry, as well as with those industries that are interacting with the parking industry. The standards are developed by industry experts, and the folks on this call, I assume, are our industry experts. So we need your help and ask for you to volunteer to participate in those working groups. The more people that we have engaged and working, the better and more appropriate the data standards are going to be to solve issues. And I fully expect will help us to save time, energy, and cost on non-value activities so that we can focus our services and efforts on delivering better services and interactions with our customers and our partners. To volunteer for the working group, if you're in North America, please contact Rachel Yoka at the listed email. And if you're in Europe, you can go to Julian O'Kelly, and they will be able to get you engaged in the working groups as well. So please volunteer. Again, that's what drives the success of this data standard. So with that, we're going to migrate to our Q&As, and I see we have a couple questions here. First one, let me read it very quickly. So the first question asks, are you considering developing data standards to support packaging and pricing of parking and related services in one of the phases? And the answer is yes. So we're not going to define standards of how to price, but how to share rate information and price information. That's actually in phase one. How to package and pricing is probably phase two as we get into the transaction. But what I want to be clear about is we are not setting a standard on how to most effectively price a specific facility. There are other entities and businesses that can help a garage define the right price. What our standard will do will help you to share that price and rate information and package information to other entities that may want to sell that package and price to the consumer, or that need to know how to interact with it so that they can allow a parking transaction to occur in the garage. So such as if Ticketmaster were to sell one of your prices, that you are comfortable that that information will flow down to your parking management system so that that consumer can then enter the parking garage. Next question. Could you provide specific examples of traffic management, traveler information, and other listed items that would specifically be utilized in relation to a parking system? So if I am understanding the question correctly, one of the things that we're already working on in the European Union is with the DataEx 2. DataEx 2 is a transit data standard and traffic management data standard used by the European Union transportation networks and systems. Specifically, we are working on how to help the European Union using the standard with truck parking. In the European Union, actually as well as in the United States, the ability for trucks to find a place to park on the highways is a significant issue. So we are using the standard and connecting it with the transit and transportation networks to help enable better control and distribution of where a truck can park by showing availability information, by showing rate information, and by showing parking place information through the various channels that a trucker might use. And then when a trucker were to make a decision of where to park, that information can flow back so that the enforcement tools and a parking purchase or reservation made, that trucker knows that they'll be able to park in a specific spot. The operating entity knows that they should be waiting for that truck to come. He's on his way. And then the enforcement teams will know that that is a valid truck in that parking space. I think the use case document, if you have a chance to, when you have a chance to download it, will give you more examples of how these various informations are being utilized via the data standard. Next question. Will there be proof of concept implementations? Would APDS offer to help early adopters of the standards? The answer to both of those is yes. As we go through the concepts, we know we are already working with several entities that are reviewing the data standards. They have participated in the working group, and they are starting to adopt in a measured format the use of the standard in their technology solutions and what they deliver and sell to customers. So I would say those proof of concepts are happening. Over time, we were also going to be working with municipalities and universities to help them define how to use and define the use of the data standard within RFP documents. We do not expect that the data standard will be accepted on a specific date at a specific time, and if you're not using the data standard, you're out of luck. The data standard is going to take time to be adopted and used effectively. So the APDS is offering to help early adopters of the standards, and we will be working both with technology platforms as well as users of those technology platforms to make sure that the standard is deployed effectively, and because it also helps us learn where does the standard need to be refined because we missed something or we did not understand the impact that the standard might have. Question, what was the marketplace box on the slide with the spaghetti chart? So the marketplace is a concept where people are coming to share. It would be like Amazon is today for a lot of the goods that we buy. There are entities that are developing marketplaces where they can sell parking and other services in a marketplace, but in an electronic marketplace. And next question, who will be the aggregator of this data? There is no one entity that will be the aggregator of this data, at least that's the original thought process. There will be many commercial entities and governmental agencies that will likely aggregate this data. The key for the data standard, though, is to make sure that all entities understand when they are sharing data, how do you make sure that that data being shared is compatible with other places that are sharing the data? So we don't expect a single aggregator of the data. We expect that there will be many, many aggregators of the data as people specialize to deliver data and services to specific customer bases or client bases. And those are all the questions that we have.
Mike, I have two more questions here. The first one is, will there be additional education available for the use of the standards?
Yes. So there will be additional. I would encourage you to go to the website, and I'm going to put it back up on the screen so everyone can go to that website, and you can start to gain more information on the standard. As Phase 1 is released, again, in the next week to 2 weeks, you'll have more detail there. We will be holding more webinars and discussions on the standard, and we are talking about using in-person meetings at various trade shows to have more in-depth in-person training on the data standards and to collect feedback. So yes, there will be more training coming in the near future.
All right, and it looks like the final question will be, when can we expect entities to sign off on the standards and start using them in RPS and RFPs?
In RFPs? So one of the things that we want to do is we expect that the first version of the standard will be available, as we said, in middle of the fourth quarter. We intend to actually have a working session with municipalities as well as the technology companies to review how to best deploy this through RFPs. What we don't want to do is create confusion or frustration when entities are going through the procurement process on leveraging and using the RFP or the data standard. So look for some more comments or training sessions and discussion points on how to engage the data standard in your RFP so that your technology partners and vendors will be able to support it effectively.
All right. Those are all my questions. Is there any other questions from the audience? If so, please type them into the chat box.
I believe this presentation will be available when on the IPI website, Justin?
Probably within the next, at the beginning of the middle of the next week. So all the participants will get a notification, let them know that it's available again. And then I think we are going to make it available for the general public shortly after that. So if you have questions or you have individuals that are interested in receiving a copy of the webinar, please don't hesitate to contact me. You can contact me directly at my last name, Grunert, Grunert, @parking.org, or you can reach out to any of the members of the staff at IPI and they can reach me. Or there's Rachel Yoka's contact information. Contact her and either herself or she'll forward it to me to reach out to you.
So in closing, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for your time. I appreciate your interest in the data standard. Please volunteer for the working groups because again, the data standard is only as good as the people that participate in helping us to define and structure it to make sure that we are solving those pain points in the industry. So I look forward to working with you, and thank you for your time.
All right. So with that, we must conclude our program today. A special thank you to Mike for being with us today. On the right above the chat, there is a link for the webinar. So please click the link section on the left-hand side of your screen so that way you can give us feedback about the webinar. We do look forward to having you join us in September for the next webinar, Park That Phone, a Road to a New Brand. Today's webinar is copyrighted 2018 by the International Parking Institute with all rights reserved. Thank you for joining us today. This concludes today's presentation. You may now disconnect.